Hi everyone. Before we get started with the Node Excel tutorials, what I'd really like to do is do a quick overview of how data is stored and formatted for social network analysis purposes. So what I have right here is a data set from our Digital Learning Transition MOOC course, and this format is something you're probably very familiar with. This is how we typically store and analyze data or store data for analysis for whether we're doing visualizations or whether we're looking at relationships between variables. In this column, for example, you see we have our user IDs. These are identifiers for users. And then we have attributes for each of these users. Their degree of education, their experience in education, what grade levels they work with, etc. In typical analyses and traditional analyses, what we're usually interested in is the relationship between these variables. So for example, this variable right here is someone indicated that one of their personal goals for the course is to connect with other educators. So we might look to see if there's a relationship between their years of experience and whether or not they have a desire to connect. Or we might look at a relationship between their level of education or their country that they're placed in, or years of experience in education, whether or not they completed the course. So for traditional analyses, what we're really interested in is the relationship between the variables themselves. However, with the social network perspective, as you probably gathered from some of those introductory videos, the relationship we're interested in is not so much between the variables of the individuals, but it's the relationships between the individuals. So let me show you how network data is typically stored for network analyses. One of the standard formats, probably the most typical, is a data matrix. So here you can see in this first column right here, we have our user IDs. So these are all the people in this case within this particular MOOC that participated in the discussion forums. So we have all of our users here. And going across the top row, we also have all of our users here. As you can see right here, these users are going to correspond. So this is user educator 58, this is educator 33, 167, 167. And what this shows is the relationships between these users. In this case, these are people who responded to one another within the discussion forums. So the relationship is a response within a discussion forum. So who responded to who in the discussion forum? So in this case, we can see that user number 3 responded to user number 58 8 times. In this case, user number 3 responded to user number 167 12 times. So as you can see, the relationships that we're interested in is the relationships between individuals. And this is the data format, this matrix that serves as kind of the standard format or the typical way that we import data into whatever network analysis program that we're going to use. Another way to store the data or to show the data is with an edge list. So in this case, we have one user over here and we have another user over here. So this indicates right here that there's some sort of relationship between user number 58 and user number 3. And in this case, this is a relationship where 58 responded to number 3 in a discussion forum. These relationships, as you remember from one of the early readings, I think is in Borgatti, where they showed all the different types of ties or relationships that we'd be interested in network analysis. These could be anything. This might indicate that they're Facebook friends, or this relationship might indicate that this person number 3 is someone 167 goes to for advice in a school. In this case, like I mentioned before, this is a relationship, a communication relationship. So who communicated to who within the discussion forums? Who sent who a message? So that goes over really briefly some of the differences between the formats. So in a traditional analysis, we'd have all of our users or IDs or social entities or whatever it might be. These might be schools instead of individual people. And then we'd have attributes about those specific people. In network analysis, we still use these attributes, but these are secondary to our relationship between individuals. One last thing I wanted to do was talk very briefly about where this data comes from. In this case, and how this data exactly is extracted into this format. So kind of a behind the scenes look at where this data originates. So this particular data is from one of the discussion forums in the MOOCs, and here's what a discussion forum might look like. So this is the introduction forums. We have someone introducing themselves, and then someone, as you can see, the number of replies and views to these discussions. And where this data is actually stored is in a database. So all of this data over here in the forums is stored in a vanilla forums database. Vanilla forums is a software that we use to manage the discussion forums. And this database has a number of tables where this data actually resides. In this case, there's a discussion forum table. So this discussion table, this is the people who originated these threads over here. So as you can see, Crystal started this discussion, Shannon started this discussion. So these discussions, these are the IDs for each individual discussion, the names of the discussions, and then the content of the postings that someone made. And then these comments are people who replied to these particular discussions. So here we have the comment ID, we have our user IDs, and then we have the actual content of the discussions. And to pull these together into a social network matrix or an edge list. In this case, what I'm going to do is be building an edge list. I will have to pull some of these databases together. So I'm going to see in this comments table, we have the user who commented. We have the actual discussion that they commented on. But as you can see, we don't know who this individual is that created this discussion. So to get this discussion ID, we'd have to go over to the discussions table. We'd look up the ID over here, and then we'd have to look up the user who created this discussion. So unfortunately, this doesn't naturally fall into a nice network analysis format. So what we need to do is create an edge list like I showed you before. So we would go over here. This is what the edge list would look like. So we want to see what user commented on whose discussion, and we need to build this. So what we'd end up doing is we'd do a little query. We'd search this database. In this particular query, we would find our user and the discussion that they commented on, and then we need to add on the user who created this discussion. So then we can see the user who responded to the other user in the discussions, and then we'll have built our edge list. So this is kind of what this would look like. So we'd run a query for that. And now we have the commenter who's commenting on the, this gets a little complicated, sorry about that. The commenter who's commenting on the user who created that particular discussion. So now we have the relationship between the two users, and we also have our edge list right there. And we can turn this into a matrix, but fortunately Node Excel prefers edge list over matrices, although it can easily import a matrix as well. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction to how data is formatted for network analyses, and where the data actually comes from and what it looks like when we're building a network analysis data set.